Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Before this day fully begins, before you check your phone, before you carry the responsibilities waiting for you, before your mind starts racing ahead into tomorrow, pause for a moment. Because someone listening right now is tired. Not because they stopped believing, not because they stopped praying, not because they stopped trusting God. They are tired because they have been trying to figure everything out alone, trying to understand the future, trying to make the perfect decision, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to control outcomes only God can control. And maybe that person is you. Maybe lately you have been carrying questions that have no easy answers. Questions about your future, questions about your family, questions about your finances, questions about decisions that seem too important to get wrong. And if you are honest, part of your heart feels overwhelmed because you simply do not know what comes next. But before this prayer continues, hear this promise. You do not need to know the entire path. You only need to trust the one who does. The God who guided Abraham into an unknown future. The God who led Moses through the wilderness. The God who directed David through seasons of uncertainty is still guiding his children today, and he is still guiding you. So stay with this prayer until the very end, and allow God to remind your heart that the next step is already in his hands. Father, before this day fully begins, before I make a single decision, before I carry another responsibility, before I allow my thoughts to run ahead into tomorrow, I come before you. Because, Lord, there are seasons in life where the path ahead feels clear, and then there are seasons like this one, seasons where I cannot see very far, seasons where I do not know exactly what comes next, seasons where I want answers, but all I seem to find are more questions. And Father, if I am honest, that uncertainty can be exhausting. Not because I have stopped trusting you, not because I have stopped believing, but because I am human. And humans like certainty. We like knowing what comes next. We like having a plan. We like feeling in control. Yet life rarely unfolds that way. Sometimes the future feels hidden. Sometimes doors remain closed. Sometimes prayers remain unanswered. Sometimes we find ourselves standing in places we never expected to be, wondering where you are leading, wondering why certain things happened, wondering if we are even moving in the right direction. And Lord, maybe that is where many of us are today, trying to move forward while secretly feeling uncertain, trying to stay strong while carrying questions nobody else knows about, trying to trust while struggling to understand what you are doing. Because the truth is, there are moments when the future feels intimidating, moments when decisions feel heavy, moments when one choice seems capable of changing everything. And during those moments, fear has a way of becoming loud. Fear tells us we are running out of time. Fear tells us we are falling behind. Fear tells us everyone else knows what they are doing while we remain lost. Fear tells us that if we make one mistake, everything will fall apart. And before long, we begin carrying pressure you never intended us to carry. We begin carrying tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. We begin carrying burdens that belong in your hands. We begin carrying responsibilities that only you can handle. And eventually, our hearts become tired. Maybe someone listening today feels exactly like that. They are tired of trying to figure everything out, tired of trying to predict the future, tired of worrying about things they cannot control, tired of carrying responsibilities that feel too heavy, tired of wondering whether they are making the right choices. And Lord, maybe they have reached the point where they simply need you to guide them. Because their own understanding is not enough anymore. Their own strength is not enough anymore. Their own plans are not enough anymore. They need you. And Father, that is not weakness. That is wisdom. Because perhaps one of the hardest lessons we ever learn is that we were never meant to control everything. We were never meant to carry every answer. We were never meant to know every detail before taking the next step. Yet so often, that is exactly what we demand. We tell ourselves we will trust you once we understand. We tell ourselves we will have peace once every question is answered. We tell ourselves we will stop worrying once the future becomes clear. But somehow, the future never becomes completely clear, and there is always another question, another uncertainty, another decision, another challenge, which means if our peace depends on certainty, we will spend our lives waiting for peace that never comes. Maybe that is why you call us to faith, because faith allows us to walk when we cannot see. Faith allows us to trust when we do not understand. Faith allows us to move forward, even when the road ahead feels unclear. And Lord, that kind of faith is not easy, especially when life has disappointed us before, especially when previous plans did not work out, especially when doors we expected to open suddenly closed, especially when prayers seem delayed. Because disappointment has a way of making us fearful of the future. It teaches us to expect more disappointment. It teaches us to protect ourselves. It teaches us to stop hoping. We find ourselves trusting fear more than we trust God. Maybe there are people listening right now who know exactly what that feels like. People who have been hurt, people who have been discouraged, people who have watched plans fall apart, people who have prayed for things that never happened, people who are carrying the scars of previous disappointments. And now every future decision feels heavier because of those past experiences. Father, heal those places. Remind them that yesterday's disappointment does not define tomorrow's possibilities. Remind them that a closed door does not mean you abandon them. Remind them that delays do not mean denial. Remind them that you are still writing their story. Because, Lord, sometimes we look at where we are and assume we have fallen behind. We compare ourselves to others. We compare our progress. We compare our success. We compare our journeys. We compare our timelines. And little by little, comparison steals our peace. We watch other people moving forward, other people reaching goals, other people receiving blessings, and we quietly wonder, why not me? Why am I still waiting? Why does my journey seem slower? Yet, Father, you never asked us to compare our story to someone else's story. You never asked us to measure our life against another person's timeline. You simply asked us to trust you, because the same God who is writing their story is writing ours too. And you never make mistakes, not with timing, not with direction, not with purpose, not with our future. Maybe that is what our hearts need to hear today. We are not behind. We are not forgotten. We are not lost. We are not abandoned. We are simply walking through a chapter that requires trust. A chapter where you are teaching us to follow your voice. A chapter where you are teaching us to depend on you. A chapter where you are teaching us that guidance does not always come with a full map. Sometimes guidance comes with a single step, and then another, because, Lord, you rarely show us the entire road, but you always show us enough for the next step. Just as you guided Abraham, just as you guided Moses, just as you guided David, just as you guided Ruth, just as you guided Paul, you are still guiding your children today, and that means you are still guiding us, even when we cannot see it, even when we do not feel it, even when confusion tries to convince us otherwise. You are still leading, still directing, still protecting, still preparing, still opening the right doors, still closing the wrong ones, still making a way where we cannot yet see one. And perhaps that is why we can face this day with confidence, not because we know everything, not because we have all the answers, not because the future is suddenly clear, but because the one who holds the future is holding us. And there is no safer place to be. Father, there is something inside the human heart that longs for certainty. We want to know where life is going. We want to know how the story ends. We want to know whether our decisions will work out. We want to know whether tomorrow will be okay. And because we want certainty so badly, we often find ourselves carrying worries that were never meant to belong to us. Maybe that is why so many people feel overwhelmed today. Not because life is impossible, but because their minds are constantly trying to solve a future they cannot see, trying to answer questions that do not yet have answers, trying to prepare for situations that may never happen, trying to control outcomes that belong only to you. And after a while, the soul becomes tired, because fear never stops asking questions. Fear always wants more information, more guarantees, more certainty, more proof. Yet no matter how much information we gather, fear always finds another question to ask. Maybe someone listening today understands that feeling. They have replayed the same situation 100 times. They have thought about every possible outcome. They have imagined every possible problem. They have spent sleepless nights trying to solve tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. And yet, despite all that thinking, they still do not have peace. Because peace does not come from understanding everything. Peace comes from trusting you. Father, that is often easier to say than it is to do, because trusting you requires surrender. and surrender feels uncomfortable. It means releasing control. It means admitting that we cannot carry everything ourselves. It means accepting that some answers will not come immediately. It means believing that you are working even when we cannot see evidence of it. And Lord, that can be difficult, especially for hearts that have been hurt before, especially for people who have experienced disappointment, especially for people who trusted before and felt confused when life did not go according to plan. Maybe there are people listening today who know exactly what that feels like. They trusted, they prayed, they hoped, yet things still became difficult. And now part of their heart struggles to trust again, not because they do not love you, but because disappointment left scars, and those scars make the future feel frightening. Maybe that is why they keep trying to control everything, because control feels safer than trust. Control feels predictable. Control feels secure, at least for a moment. But eventually, control becomes exhausting, because no matter how hard we try, we cannot control everything. We cannot control every outcome. We cannot control every person. We cannot control every circumstance. And we certainly cannot control tomorrow. Only you can. Maybe that is why Jesus spoke so often about not worrying about tomorrow. He knew that today's strength was designed for today's responsibilities, not tomorrow's, not next year's, not 10 years from now. Yet so often we try carrying all of it at once. Today's burden, tomorrow's burden, next month's burden, future possibilities, future fears, future uncertainties. And eventually, the weight becomes overwhelming, not because life became too heavy, but because we picked up burdens you never asked us to carry. Father, help us recognize those burdens today. Help us identify the fears that have been stealing our peace. Help us identify the worries that have been draining our energy. Help us identify the places where we have trusted fear more than your promises. Because, Lord, your promises remain true. Even when circumstances change, even when feelings change, even when life feels uncertain, you remain faithful, you remain constant, you remain trustworthy. And perhaps that is what our hearts need to remember today. The future may be unknown to us, but it is not unknown to you. There is not a single moment ahead that surprises you. Not one conversation, not one opportunity, not one challenge, not one blessing. You already see it all. You already know it all. Maybe that truth changes everything. Because if you are already in tomorrow, then I do not need to fear tomorrow. If you are already making a way, then I do not need to force a way. If you are already guiding me, then I do not need to panic every time I cannot see the entire road. I simply need to keep walking with you. One step, one prayer, one day at a time. Maybe that sounds too simple. But perhaps faith has always been simpler than we make it. Not easy, but simple. Stay close to God. Trust His voice. Take the next step. Leave the future in His hands. And repeat. Again and again. Because, Father, you have never asked us to figure out our entire lives. You have only asked us to trust you with today. To trust you with this moment. To trust you with the next step. And maybe that is where freedom begins. Freedom begins when we stop demanding answers for everything. Freedom begins when we stop carrying responsibilities that belong to you. Freedom begins when we stop trying to force open doors you have not opened. Freedom begins when we finally rest in the truth that you are already guiding our path. Even now, even in uncertainty, even in confusion, even in seasons where nothing seems clear, you are still leading, still speaking, still directing, still protecting, still preparing. And perhaps for the first time in a long while, our hearts are beginning to believe that again. Not because every question has been answered, but because our trust is becoming stronger than our fear. Father, the more we walk through life, the more we realize something important. The greatest challenge is not always the obstacle in front of us. Sometimes the greatest challenge is learning how to trust you when we cannot see what is ahead. Because trust sounds beautiful when everything is going well. Trust feels easy when prayers are being answered. Trust feels natural when doors are opening. Trust feels comfortable when life makes sense. But true trust is revealed during uncertainty. True trust is revealed when we do not have all the answers. True trust is revealed when the future feels unclear. And perhaps that is why so many people listening today feel tired. Not because they have stopped believing, but because they have been carrying the emotional weight of uncertainty for too long. They have been trying to predict outcomes, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to protect themselves from disappointment, trying to control situations that were never theirs to control, and somewhere along the way, their hearts became exhausted. Father, today we surrender that exhaustion to you. We surrender the pressure to have everything figured out. We surrender the pressure to know exactly what comes next. We surrender the pressure to carry tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. Because the truth is, we were never designed to live that way. You created us to walk with you, not ahead of you, not behind you, with you. And perhaps that is the invitation you are giving us today. Not an invitation to understand everything, but an invitation to trust you more deeply. Maybe there is someone listening right now who feels stuck. They've been praying for direction, waiting for clarity, searching for answers, yet they still feel uncertain. Father, meet them in that place. Remind them that being uncertain does not mean being abandoned. Remind them that confusion does not mean failure. Remind them that waiting does not mean you have stopped working. Because, Lord, some of the most powerful moments in Scripture happened when people did not know what was coming next. Abraham did not know where the journey would lead. Moses did not know how the sea would open. Joshua did not know how the walls would fall. David did not know how the promise would be fulfilled. Yet step by step, you guided them. Day by day, you provided for them. Moment by moment, you proved yourself faithful. And you have not changed. You are still the same God who makes a way where there seems to be no way, the same God who opens doors no one can shut, the same God who provides wisdom to those who ask, the same God who leads his children with love. And maybe that is exactly what our hearts need to remember today. The burden of the future does not belong to us. It belongs to you. The weight of tomorrow does not belong to us. It belongs to you. The questions we cannot solve, the situations we cannot control, they all belong to you. And Father, what a relief it is to know that you can carry what we cannot. Because there are moments when our strength feels limited, moments when our wisdom feels insufficient, moments when our confidence disappears. But your strength never fails, your wisdom never runs out, your faithfulness never changes. And perhaps that is why we can move forward today with peace, not because we know what tomorrow holds, but because we know who holds tomorrow. Not because every question has been answered, but because the one who knows every answer is walking beside us. Not because the road is suddenly easy, but because the guide is trustworthy. Father, help us remember that when fear returns, help us remember that when doubts appear, help us remember that when uncertainty tries to steal our peace, because fear will always focus on what could go wrong, but faith focuses on the God who is already there. Fear says, what if everything falls apart? Faith says, what if God is already working? Fear says, what if I fail? Faith says, what if God carries me through? Fear says, what if I make the wrong decision? Faith says, what if God is able to redirect me, even when I make mistakes? Your grace is greater than our failures. Your wisdom is greater than our confusion, and your plans are greater than our understanding. Maybe that is why we do not need to be afraid of the future, because even if we do not walk perfectly, you remain faithful. Even if we do not understand everything, you remain faithful. Even if we occasionally stumble, you remain faithful. And Father, that truth changes everything. It means we can stop striving, stop panicking, stop carrying unnecessary burdens, stop trying to control every detail, and simply walk with you. One step at a time, one prayer at a time, one day at a time, trusting that the God who brought us this far will not abandon us now. Trusting that the God who opened previous doors can open future doors. Trusting that the God who carried us through previous storms can carry us through future storms. Trusting that the God who has always been faithful will remain faithful, because that is who you are. And today, before this prayer comes to an end, we choose to trust you again, not because life is perfect, not because every answer has arrived, not because every fear has disappeared, but because you are worthy of trust. You were worthy yesterday, you are worthy today, and you will be worthy tomorrow. So Father, lead our steps, guide our decisions, direct our paths, protect our hearts, and help us walk through this day with peace, knowing that we never walk alone, knowing that you are before us, beside us, behind us, and already waiting in every tomorrow we fear. As this new day begins, May the Lord guide every step you take. May He give you wisdom when you need direction. May He give you peace when you feel uncertain. May He give you courage when fear tries to hold you back. And may you remember this simple truth throughout the day. You do not need to know the entire path. You only need to stay close to the one who does. The Lord is guiding you. The Lord is protecting you. The Lord is walking with you. And He will never leave you alone. In Jesus' name, amen.